Hi everyone and welcome to another Rubber Dance Design Team tutorial, and this one's all about having fun with envelopes. It was inspired by Bibby's brand new set of stamps, which are called, funnily enough, envelope stamps, and there are lots of lovely stamps in this collection to help you jazz up the envelopes that you send to people so that they can be just as gorgeous as your cards. So this really is a fun tutorial. It's about playing, it's about just bringing together all those different techniques that you've been using on your cards to make fun envelopes. This little project was inspired by one of the envelope stamps in the set that says "Dull people send dull envelopes," and I'm going to make sure that I haven't got any dull envelopes on my desk at the end of this tutorial. So I normally make all my cards myself and then have to buy envelopes to fit them, but I did have a pack of cream cards and cream envelopes, and I'm going to use the envelopes from those for this little tutorial. So here are the gorgeous brand new stamps from the lovely Bibby over at Rubber Dance, and you can see in the top left hand corner, "Only dull people send dull envelopes." So this is me proving I'm not going to be dull. So I'm going to follow a little recipe, a little set of steps, and you can see me here. I'm just shaking up some sprays that I have in my collection. These are chalk sprays by Cosmic Shimmer. I'm going to stick to green, blue and orange, mainly because I couldn't get the yellow to work and I couldn't be bothered to go and wash out the nozzle. And I am going to start by just laying down a little bit of colour to start with in different colour combinations on my envelope. So you can see I'm just randomly spraying the colours. So that one was blue and orange. This one is going to be blue and green. I'm drying the sides off so that I can do the back at the same time. And remember, as we go through this, you can do as many of the steps or as few of the steps as you like. This is me trying to get the yellow to work and it wouldn't, so I give up with the yellow and stick to my three colours. So this one's going to have all three colours on. So I've got one with blue and orange, one with blue and green, and one with all three colours. You can see I've just randomly sprayed them to start the colour scheme off, and now we're going to build up the layers. And I started out by deciding to practice my dripping skills. I don't happen to be very good at dripping skills, I'm not quite sure. They never end up dripping where I want them to drip, and I think that's probably the nature of dripping. But I'm going to just create some more texture on my envelopes by adding some drips. So by its very nature, spraying is a little bit messy. So if you want to contain all of that spray, then open up a box. Make it so that you can get into the front of a box or turn the box on its side, put your work into the box and then spray in the confines of the box, and that way you won't end up spraying everywhere. I have actually got a lovely speckled wall in front of my desk, so I obviously haven't taken that route, because if I sprayed in a box you probably wouldn't be able to see what I was doing. So I just have to go with making sure that there's nothing on my desk that will be damaged by overspray. So you can see I'm just trying different ways of adding some drippy marks to my envelope, sticking to the colour scheme that I've laid down before. And if you want to, you can pick up those drips that end up on your mat, because it all adds to the texture. You don't have to use chalk sprays for this. Any of your sprays will do. There's a multitude out there. There are sparkly sprays, there are vibrant sprays, pastel sprays, and they would all work well on your envelopes, and they're a really quick way to add colour to any project. So far we've just sprayed au naturel, then we've created little puddles of ink and just moving our envelopes, tapping the excess so that it drips down the envelopes to create little tracks of interest. And then I'm drying that off again and moving on to the next way of adding some texture to my envelopes. Now you might find, as I did, because we're using quite a wet medium on our envelopes, that they wrinkle up a little bit in this process, but you've got two options to flatten them out again once they're dry. One is to stick them under a couple of books, and two is to actually get out your iron and iron your project flat again. The other thing that I noticed was some of the envelope bottom flap where the wet medium had lifted the glue. I had to just glue that section closed again, and you'll see me do that later on. So my drips are dry. Now I'm going to use a couple of different stencils to add some more texture to my envelopes. So I could have flipped my stencil over at this point and printed with my stencil, but I decided just to choose the positive, and I wasn't too bothered about losing that ink on the negative. There are some really good people out there who use up every spot of ink on scraps of paper that they use later in their projects, but I tend to find that I end up with a pile of papers that I never use because I always want to start something new. But the option is there should you want to be a thrifty crafter. You can see that this process really is quite quick. So it's a great way to batch make a load of not dull envelopes at once. For instance, you can use them to send off your ATC swaps or your tag swaps. So it is quite a nice little project to take on, so that you've got them handy and ready to use when you want to. So again, I'm sticking to the colour scheme for that particular envelope, and I've got 3 different stencils that I've used to add another layer of texture to my envelopes. As I said, at any point during this tutorial you could stop. You could have stopped at that point, but I'm going to carry on adding lots of different layers to my envelopes. So I've picked out some distress inks that go with the colours that I'm using. This one is Salty Ocean, and I'm just going around the edges of my envelope for definition, and then coming carefully around the actual flap of the envelope. Be a little bit careful there, because that one isn't the double thickness that the main part of the envelope is, and you don't want to crease it up. So moving on to a green, which is Mowed Lawn, and again I'm just going all the way around the edges for definition. And then coming in with some Wild Honey. Okay, so coming along nicely. And now I want to add some more texture. This time I'm going to be using a stamp. This is from the Mushroom Stamp set from Rubber Dance, and this stamp really is great for texture. It's the underneath part of a mushroom, and I really love the sort of starburst quality that it has. So I'm going to stamp this one all over my envelopes in the various colours that go with the colour scheme I've created. This is the smaller version of the same stamp. It almost looks like a dandelion. So quite a versatile little set of stamps if you want texture on your backgrounds. Now, you know me, I love a good cautionary tale. So as I start to add some of my envelope stamps to my envelopes, I turn it over and realise I've stamped it upside down. But I'm just going to go with the flow, and I'm going to send this one to somebody in Australia. So I'm just going to make sure that these stamps are up the right way, but the flap is upside down. So I've got swap mail, which obviously is great for us crafters. This one sends love inside, happy mail. So these really are gorgeous little stamps to use on your crafting projects, particularly if you love to take part in swaps. They really are great for that kind of project. So I'm just working out that I'm going to go completely on the upside down now, and I'm going to turn this hand that's pointing to the flap upside down to create a pattern on the other side. Since we already have a bit of upside down going on my Australian envelope. So this turned out to be a great way to have a trial run with all of my lovely new stamps. So you can see I'm just going through them and picking out a couple that go together and then stamping on the envelope. And I'm stamping with a black archival ink. So this one is all about love, so sealed with a kiss, and then lots and lots of kisses. And even though I use a lot of stamps on this project, I probably don't use half of the stamps that are available in this versatile stamp set. So heart mail, which I had a little hand in, I might add, because this is a combination of the fact that you send love when you send crafting projects, and obviously all your little crafting projects are works of art. So the combination of those two came together to form that lovely sentiment. And moving on to my last envelope, so I've got a little snail mail. Combined with a very useful and bendy do not bend. And then the stamp that started it all. Only dull people send dull envelopes. Not me anymore. I just fancy this little stamp to finish off this envelope. Now I'm just giving my envelopes a little blast with my heat gun to make sure that all that ink is dry before I start on the next step. Always make sure that any project is dry before you start to work with a black pen. And now it's time to doodle to your heart's content. I really did have no plan on the design for each of these envelopes, so they've all taken on a life of their own, and I'm just doing whatever takes my fancy. So I always like a bit of black and white check when I'm doodling, so I'm adding a little bit of detail along the edge of the envelope closure, and then I'm coming back in with a white pen to emphasize that little stripy check, and then I'm going to go right around the whole envelope just for good measure. So at the moment I'm using a black Pitt pen to do the black doodling, and I've got a Posca paint pen for the white work that I will add to each of my envelopes. So you can bring all the techniques that you use in your art journals here. Anything that I probably wouldn't add is anything that's going to stick out and get caught in the postal process. So keeping everything nice and flat that you decorate your envelopes with. I wouldn't attach any flowers or brads or anything like that. But I might add a little touch of glitter, but I probably stick to stickles where the glue embeds the actual glitter, so it's not loose and likely to fall off on the poor postman. Again, coming back in with my white pen to finish off the back of the envelope. And then adding the same detail on the front. So bear in mind that you are going to have to write an address on your envelopes. So you could actually create an area that you keep blank by sticking a post-it note on your envelope when you're spraying it, but I've chosen, because my colours are nice and light, to just leave the area where the address can be written, so it would stand out even though I have decorated the envelope. So now adding again some details around the designs that I've stamped on this envelope, and I'm just adding that stamp edge to each of those special delivery stamps. And then I thought I'd create it, or bring all of the stamps together to look a bit like a border on the edge of the envelope. And you can see I've still got plenty of room to write the address to the right of this detail. And you'll find that once you start along an idea, you'll be able to repeat that process, so your design becomes, although it was random to start with, it looks quite cohesive at the end. So repeating the stripes, which has the added benefit of emphasising the stamp sentiment that started off this entire project. As I just add a little white detail to my Australian envelope, you can see that you can keep things as simple or as complicated as you like as you decorate your envelopes. And these stamps are a real must for anyone that takes part in regularly corresponding, particularly with your fellow crafter, because they'll just be really appreciated by us crafties, as you can see. I do love a good swap, and if it turns up in an envelope like this, it makes it all even more exciting. So you can see I've got 3 little envelopes. They're all different, but they all look like they belong in a set. And I wanted to finish it off by adding an inner to my envelope. So I've gone through my stash of paper scraps, and I've just looked for paper scraps that are obviously in the colour scheme that I'm using and that are wide enough to fit in my envelope. So start by trimming your paper scrap down so that it's approximately 1/4 of an inch shallower or 1/4 of an inch less wide than your envelope. You should be able to just tuck it inside fairly easily. If you can do that, then you can move on to the next step. So I've just pushed enough of the paper into the envelope so that you can't see the bottom of the paper, and then I'm just folding it over where the natural fold on the envelope is. So that's your first step when creating your little insert for your envelope. I'm just making sure at this point that it's straight by lining it up with the edge of the paper. So the inserted part of the square is down against my mat, and this is the piece that's going to form the flap section on your envelope. So I'm just drawing around the edge of my envelope, but you have to allow for the glue strip to still be usable. So I'm pulling the paper down approximately the width of my glue strip, as you can see, and then I'm drawing around the top of the envelope again, and you'll be able to see that when I trim off at this second line, this should fit perfectly inside my envelope. Then once you've done this once, you should be able to use that as a template for any envelopes you create after this point. So you can see I'm adding this to the scrap piece of paper and just cutting out a second blue inner. So I cut out 2 blue inners and 1 orange inner because that's just the sizes of scraps of paper that I had. If I could have found a green one, I would have used that, but I had enough of the blue to make the inserts. So you can see there I added the inside piece of the insert first, and then I stuck down the flap of the envelope. So because this one hasn't got a fold at the moment, I'm just going to be a little bit careful. I'm adding the glue to the piece that sits inside the envelope, and then I'm shuffling it so that it's even on that flap at the top. Then I'm making the fold, because this was the one I cut out as the template, the second template, and then adding the glue to attach it to the flap of the envelope. Now, as I said, you might also find that you need to add a little bit of glue at this point to any part of the bottom part of your envelope that has come unstuck because of using the wet sprays. So it was at this point that I thought, actually, do you know what? I'm going to make some little notelets with the cards that obviously came with this little blank card set. So they're really plain cream cards, and because they're going to be for notes, I'm really not going to do much decoration at all, but I want to make them match each of the envelopes that they're going to be inside. So using some of those same techniques, I'm just adding a little detail to the bottom corner of the card front with my card spray. I'm not bothered about any overspray. If I get light spotting on the rest of the card, that doesn't matter for what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to make sure it's dry before I move on to the next step. And I want to create some little splatters with the colours. So this one is going to go in the envelope that had 3 colours. So I've taken the spray mechanism out of the bottle, and then I'm just tapping that with my finger, or you could use another implement like a pencil if you don't want to get it on your fingers. And I'm adding some drips in a contrasting colour to my card front and back, as it happens. Again, I'm not, like I said, I'm not being precious about where this ends up, because this is really just going to be a simple little notelet card. So again, I'm using each of the 3 stencils. So this one, this little notelet will end up in the swap mail envelope. If you can hear any buzzing in the background of this voiceover, the most enormous fly has just flown in out of the garden into my craft room. So apologies if that does come near enough to the microphone for you to hear it. So again, I'm just adding a little bit of splatter. And because this envelope was the 3 colour envelope, I'm going to splatter with the orange as well. So that they don't mix up, I'm going to dry off the green and then add in the orange. I am trying to keep the dots to one side of the card, but again, like I said, I'm not bothered if it goes on the rest of the card. If you are, then you just mask off the other side of your little notelet. So back in with the final stencil, which is the flower stencil. I love how that sort of just blends out by doing it that way, concentrating the spray in one corner, but it just blends out over the rest of the stencil. And then coming back in with the green, This time I'm just going to spray it rather than splatter it for another idea. Now I could actually leave it at this point, fold them in half, tuck them in the envelopes, and I could write little notes in them, perhaps to accompany an ATC swap for instance. But I am going to finish them off a little bit more than this, and I'm going to create a paper inner that matches the colour scheme. So I've got peach and blue and green paper that I'm going to turn into inners for the cards. So I'm starting out by cutting my 3 little pieces of paper just slightly shorter than the depth of my card. Then I'm folding them in half, and I've marked with a pencil where I want to trim those inners to, so the inners are just slightly smaller than the card itself, so when the card is closed the inner doesn't poke out at all, but it is in the contrasting paper that goes with the colours that we've used on the card so far. So I'm thinking I want to use some of the paper that I've used on the inside of the envelope just to add a little bit more detail to each of my note cards. So I'm going to create some simple paper bows to go on the front of the card. So again, using the scrap papers that I've got left, I'm just creating or cutting a couple of 1/2 inch strips of those papers. And so to make your paper bow detail, you're going to add a strip of the paper across the front of the card. So I'm just gluing that down and then trimming it to length. And this really is a simple embellishment. I'm bearing in mind that I want it to be fairly flat as this is a note card, but it just gives the illusion of a little paper bow. The next thing that you want to do is to create the bow itself. I'm just going slightly off camera there. So I've got a strip of paper that I am folding in half, and then I'm adding glue to that centre section and then just bringing in each end of the paper strip. And then we need to create the little knot in the middle of the bow, and I'm just wrapping another piece from the paper strip around the centre of the bow. Then you can attach it to your card, and I'm attaching it slightly to the right. So I know this is going to squash flat in the envelope, but it just adds a little bit of extra detail to the notelets. And the other thing that I want to do is add some texture to the inside of each of the notelets. So I'm going to add again a little bit of splatter to each of those inserts, keeping to the colour scheme of the envelope for which they are intended. This one is the card front that I sprayed and splattered, so I'm going to spray and splatter it to match. You can see this detail is easily written over when you use it as a notelet. Then once your inserts are dry, you're ready to put them into your little notelet. So I'm just checking to make sure that my splatters are dry. And then I'm going to add glue. You could use double-sided tape if you want to, along the insert on the top with the insert closed. And the reason I choose to add the glue to the top edge rather than the bottom edge is because when you open your card, the insert automatically opens as you open the front of the card. So you can see it really is a simple idea to make a matching notelet to go in your fancy envelope, and I just wanted to add a little bit more stamping, again bearing in mind that I'm likely to use these if I take part in any swaps in the future. I don't know about you, but I always like to add a few little embellishments to the parcel, just so it's a nice surprise, along with perhaps an ATC or a tag once it gets to its final destination. So I'm going to use this stamp on the bottom of each of my notelets that says "Packed with Love." can see on this one I chose to spray and splatter because the envelope had the same effect as did the card, and I'm adding the same stamp. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. It really did grow further than I intended. So from one stamp that said dull people send dull envelopes, I have come up with something that I can either use myself or give as a gift. So now I'm just matching up my note cards to their fancy envelopes. And you can see how everything comes together now. So because I've limited my colour palette and repeated several of the steps on the note card, everything matches perfectly. And you can see here, this is where perhaps you might need to add a little bit of glue if your envelope is coming apart due to the fact that we've used quite wet sprays to decorate our gorgeous envelopes. I'm hoping by creating this little project I am not dull anymore. This is the Australian envelope, so my bow matches the insert, and then my daisy envelope. Again, I've matched the bow to the insert. So if you create a set of these envelopes, you could easily give them as a gift. So packaging up my little set of envelopes with a matching ribbon, and suddenly it turns a little set of notelets into a gift. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial enough to sit down and make your envelopes less dull, and also perhaps to pop along to Rubber Dance and check out those gorgeous stamps. They really do work perfectly if you are, like me, someone who likes to swap mail with other crafters around the world. They really do make an extra nice surprise when an envelope turns up nicely decorated, and the lovely Bibby, whenever she sends us our design team stamps, she always makes sure that she decorates her envelopes. So I hope that she likes what I have done with her stamps today. So if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget, as usual, to hit the subscribe button, the like button and the share button, and I look forward to crafting with you again very soon. And until next time, thank you for watching. As usual, here are your links. This is the link back to my blog, where you'll be able to find the link to Rubber Dance if you want to check out these stamps for yourself, as well as lots of other inspiration. This is the link to the full playlist for all of the Rubber Dance projects on my YouTube channel, as well as the link for this particular gorgeous frame that I made recently as part of the design team. And last but not least, here is the link to my Etsy shop, where you can find projects like this one. This one is called the Surprise Package, and I'm leaving you an extra link so that you can see exactly what the surprise is if you watch this video. So the link to my Etsy shop, where I sell online workshops. This is the inside and outside of the Surprise Package envelope. You could decorate it like this. In fact, you can decorate it however you want. There's lots of ideas over there, as well as everything you need to make this gorgeous project for yourself. Don't forget to check out the video, because it really is a fun project to make, and there is definitely a surprise for the recipient when they open it.